everyone, and welcome to Morbid Cases. I'm going to dive right into the story of Tammy Alexander, a 16-year-old girl who was found murdered in 1979. To this day, her case remains unsolved under very eerie circumstances. Tammy Jo Alexander was born on November 2nd, 1963, to a woman named Barbara Jenkins. Now, I don't have a lot of information on Tammy's life up until just before her death, but I'll give you everything we know so far. So, she was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and we know she eventually moved to Brooksville, Florida, with her mother and stepfather. And she attended high school there. She actually attended two different high schools. One was Hernando High School in Brooksville, and the other was South Sumter High School, which is in Bushnell, Florida. So I'm assuming she moved at least 2 times while living in Florida, since it's about a 30-minute drive from Bushnell to Brooksville. I found information that Tammy's father left her life at a very young age, basically from the get-go. Her father had zero hand in raising her, and she never had contact with him either, and her mother, Barbara, was a known drug addict. It was public knowledge back then that Barbara had a big issue with pills. She popped a lot of pills, and in doing this, it would send her into these outrages and temper tantrums. Barbara was also known to be suicidal and attempted suicide quite a few times. Tammy also had a sister who shared a different father. Her name was Pamela, and she remembers the abusive household quite well. She also remembers being around 11, which would make Tammy about 9, and this was when Pam would move out to live with her biological grandmother. We're not sure if the grandmother knew of the abuse, but it would be pretty messed up if the 9-year-old was left there knowingly. Pam mentioned that their mother essentially worshipped Tammy Jo, considering her the golden child. However, with Barbara taking pills, along with her unpredictable outbursts and manic episodes, it's easy to believe she experienced significant mood swings, and you'll soon see why I believe Tammy's mother didn't care for her daughter as much as she led people to assume. Tammy had a school friend by the name of Laurel Nowell. They were very close, by all accounts. They were in the same grade, and both were the same age at 15. Now, like most of us did in high school, Tammy and Laurel would write notes back and forth, and this would be when Laurel received a letter from Tammy, one she would always remember. The letter said, "I hate these kinds of letters. They're so damn sad, especially when you have to say goodbye to the person who means the most to you. I know we'll never lose track of each other, just keep the mail coming." Then she mentions towards the end of the letter that she's taking off that September to get married, which Laurel thought was super weird. Tammy had been in a relationship with an older man named Kevin Williams, also from Brooksville, Florida. I'm not sure that they ever met in person because we only know that they sent letters and packages back and forth. Laurel knew at some point she couldn't keep Tammy from doing something she set her mind to, and she also knew Tammy had it in her to go through with these plans, regardless of it being a bad idea. You see, Tammy Jo spent a lot of time hitchhiking, hanging around at truck stops, leaving her hometown for days, sometimes weeks at a time. There was one occasion when Tammy and Laurel traveled with truckers all the way to California. How long they spent there is unknown, but we do know they were juveniles, and they eventually called their parents to have them buy plane tickets so that they could go back home. So for Tammy to say, "Yeah, I'm just going to run off and get married," it wasn't the end of the world, but it was weird, considering nobody, including Tammy, really knew this guy. And this was such a big decision for someone her age. I couldn't find a for sure answer on Kevin's age at the time he was sending letters back and forth to Tammy, but we do know he had already graduated high school, so he really didn't have any business messing around with a 15-year-old girl, let alone trying to marry her. But as Kevin stated to the police many times, they were in love. Tammy would write letters to Kevin, but she would also record messages on tapes and mail them to Kevin. Now, long after Tammy's murder, these recordings were given to police by Kevin in 2014, but police didn't release these audio recordings until 2020. The following messages were sent to Kevin by Tammy Jo in July of 1979.
Well, hi Kevin, how you doing? I'm fine. That was nice to hear from you. I'm very glad to get your letter. Oh, that was cool. I'm looking at a postcard that says "Moon over Miami, the alluring beauty of moonrise, shimmering over the Atlantic Ocean in Florida." It's got 2 palm trees, the moon, the ocean, and a girl in a white shirt and black pants on it, and it's blue. Beautiful. And pretty beautiful, yeah. I gotta go now, so you take care and be careful.
This is where the twisted part of the story comes into play, because in 1979, all anybody knew was that Tammy was gone. Just gone. She apparently said nothing to anybody besides Laurel because Tammy was never even reported as missing. Police did confirm that they found zero record of Tammy Jo ever being reported missing by her mother, which was a huge shock to a lot of people, especially Pamela. Pamela was obviously moved out and gone well before Tammy went missing, so she can't recall where Tammy last was or where she was headed to. It was also a huge shock to investigators when they found out that Tammy's mom and stepfather were running their own truck stop. Which one, I'm not sure, but if it was the same one that Tammy may have disappeared from, then that's extremely suspicious. But her mom said she had no idea where her daughter ran off to. Police were under the assumption, based on Tammy's history, that she ran off to hitch a ride. She was then listed as a runaway, and her last known location was her residence. But how in the fuck can we not even have an estimated month as to when she vanished? All we were told is that she went missing during the first half of 1979, but that would mean that she was gone by July, and we know that she wasn't gone by July because of those messages. We also know she wasn't planning on leaving until September, as stated in her letter to Laurel. So we have to ask ourselves, what? Was her mom just so high on pills that she can't even see her child is missing? If not, then she figured Tammy Jo had just up and left again, and she would be back eventually. But that eventually never came, because just 4 months after her passing, Tammy Jo's lifeless body would be found. But the location is quite distant from any expected closeness. A father and son were passing by their cornfield in Caledonia, New York, on their way to grab a morning coffee at a diner. This was their family cornfield that butts up against the Genesee River, which is around 1,200 miles from Brooksville, Florida, a field that was due to be plowed that very morning. But plans were about to change because the farmer's son, who was 16 at the time, spotted something red as they passed by. He's like, "Dad, I think I just saw something back there." So they're immediately thinking there's a hunter or something on their property. So they stop and turn around. They walk about 20 yards or 60 feet into the corn, where they stumbled upon a dead female body. Her body was crumpled in what looked like an uncomfortable and unnatural position. She looked very young and appeared to be a teenager. She was fully clothed, wearing corduroy pants, a plaid shirt, and a men's red jacket. Her jewelry was still on her body, along with 2 keychains on her belt loops that read, "He who holds the key can open my heart." A cause of death was determined almost immediately, a gunshot wound to the forehead, just above the right eye from a .38 Special. And by the looks of her remains, it seems as though she was shot while standing facing her killer. A report I read said that her facial expression when she was shot was a face of pure surprise, like she was caught off guard just seconds before she was shot. It was determined that she was shot in the head close to the road first, then her killer drug her body into the cornfield, where she was shot again in the back, assuming to ensure she was deceased. The medical examiner found zero evidence of sexual assault. In searching for the exact day of her death, I found that they listed it as November 10th, 1979. I also found reports to say that the farmer and his son actually walked that field almost daily. So for her to be out there any longer than a day or two without them noticing would have been almost impossible, considering they could visibly see her from the road. Now, you and I already know that this is Tammy Jo, but back then they didn't have anyone in any database that matched this female. They didn't have any missing persons reports, and they obviously didn't have her DNA on file. They were getting leads here and there that seemed promising at the time, like in the early 80s when they suspected a former sheriff and serial killer named Christopher Wilder was their killer, but Wilder was shot and killed in a police shootout before an interview could even take place. They suspected him due to his history. And the men's red jacket that Tammy was found wearing was of the same brand of clothes that he would usually purchase. Another lead came when they got the analysis of their Jane Doe's stomach contents. The meal she last ate was tracked down to a diner not far from where the body was found. The police ended up finding 2 witnesses. One was a waitress who said she saw the victim in the diner the night before she died, and another said they saw the victim with an older man. They said he had black-rimmed glasses, a plaid shirt, and drove a tan-paneled station wagon. So now police are thinking, okay, so if she was here, then maybe she traveled to different places in this area and on her way to this area. And after taking a closer look at the jewelry that was found on her body, they discovered that the jewelry had been purchased somewhere in the southwest region of the U.S., since it matched with the Native American local jewelry that's specific to this area. So they knew for sure that their Jane Doe had passed through and shopped there shortly before her death. Then, in 1984, the prolific serial killer Henry Lee Lucas admitted to killing the girl without even knowing who she was or what she looked like, though this confession was later proven false. Before she was buried, investigators held onto clippings of the victim's hair, but these clippings did not contain the root, so they were completely useless as the root is what contains DNA. So in 2005, they exhumed her body in order to obtain mitochondrial DNA from her bones and teeth. They also took samples from her clothing. The samples from her teeth and bones determined she had lived in the southern part of the U.S. for a majority of her life. By this time, her case was very cold, and investigators were sure that this girl had to have been from another state, and that theory would be proven true in 2006 when samples of Callie Jane Doe's clothing were sent off to be retested. They were hopeful that new technology might find the evidence to help them narrow down where she came from, and they ended up finding multiple traces of pollen such as Australian pine, oak, spruce, and birch. The pollen grains found on the clothing were analyzed against a control sample collected from the rural New York location where the body was found. While oak is prevalent across the U.S., Australian pine is prevalent in Florida, California, Arizona, Hawaii, and Texas, and both spruce and birch are found in New York. But none of these pollen types were present in the control sample, nor were spruce or birch trees located near the body dump site. This led investigators to conclude that the pine pollen on her clothing must have come from a different location. The spruce and birch pollen on the unidentified body indicated a connection to species typically found in California's mountainous regions. A 2012 analysis reaffirmed that the pollen could only have originated from California, Arizona, or Florida. They noted that the victim's body, when she was found, had tan lines from some sort of halter top, suggesting she had been in a region where there was significant sunlight during October and November, since tanning beds were not a huge thing at the time. Then on January 26, 2015, 35 years after she was found, Callie Jane Doe was finally identified. This had only become possible after Carl Koppelman, a moderator for Web Sleuths, identified the missing person entry for 16-year-old Tammy Jo Alexander on Name Us. He promptly contacted law enforcement and relevant parties to highlight the striking similarity. Investigators from Livingston County, along with the sheriff's office in Hernando County, Florida, where Alexander had resided, also recognized the resemblance. Once they knew the testing from the victim's clothing had generated a DNA profile, they tracked down existing family. This DNA was then matched to Pamela, confirming it was indeed Tammy Jo Alexander. But all of this testing would also generate one male DNA profile found on that red jacket that police were sure belonged to their killer at one time. But unfortunately, they didn't have anything to run it against, and CODIS didn't generate any hits. Tammy's killer could have been Chris Wilder or the diner man or a trucker who had picked her up and eventually realized she couldn't stay with him. But I wasn't convinced because I did a little research into other similar unsolved homicide cases, and I came across a case they're calling the Redhead murders, which were a series of at least 5 murders that occurred between 1978 and 1992. The victims and suspected victims that they've connected so far are Lisa Nichols, Tina Farmer, Tracy Walker, Michelle Inman, Epsie Pilgrim, Priscilla Blevins, Karen Nippers, Wetzel County Jane Doe, Lori Pinnell, Elizabeth Lamont, Pulaski County Jane Doe, Betty Wisely, Donna Nelton, and Stacy Čihorsky. They do suspect that there are more connected, unsurfaced victims out there that were killed by one or more killers. In 2018, Tina Farmer's case was reopened after a man by the name of Jerry Johns became a #1 suspect while he was serving time for trying to strangle another redheaded woman. But John ended up passing away in prison in 2015. They suspect that Jerry may have killed up to 11 of these victims, but at the end of the day, they don't have proof that he committed any of these murders besides finding his DNA on Tina. Victim 𝚃𝚎𝚛𝚎𝚙𝚙 killer was also discovered but never prosecuted. The states in which these victims were found include Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, North Carolina, Missouri, and Georgia. I didn't find any articles or reports to say that Tammy Jo was connected with these cases, but I found that there were some similarities that could put her with the rest of these victims. And since 2015, the biggest lead that investigators have had was finding out that Tammy had ties with the Rainbow Prison Ministry in Young Harris, Georgia, though we're not exactly sure for how long or what the reason was. This was a ministry that helped adults and adolescents with probation and parole type stuff. Further investigating concluded that there were 3 men in the ministry who knew Tammy on a personal level, and police thought their killer could have been any of them, but their DNA was tested and none of them were a match. As of 2020, the DNA that they found on Tammy's clothing is being pushed through a national database, so hopefully someday it will bring Tammy the closure she rightfully deserves. There are so many people who pray for and still think of Tammy Jo, people who long for closure for her even after her loved ones have passed on. This case isn't totally doomed. It's still very much solvable, but we need reach and we need people talking. So please do Tammy a favor and share this video. Let's keep her name and face alive, as there could be someone out there who knows something. If you have any information about the murder of Tammy Alexander, you are asked to contact the Livingston County Sheriff's Office. I've linked their contact information in the description box below, as well as any public information about Tammy's case. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. As always, your subs and love are greatly appreciated. Don't forget to leave me a like, and I will see you at the next one.